Hello and welcome to Chapter 9. This is psychological development, or sometimes if you're in college, they call it developmental psychology. So it doesn't matter, but really what we're talking about here is over the lifetime of humans, how do they develop? And they develop in some very predictable stages. And we're going to talk about how we develop basically from inside the womb until death. So let's get started. Okay, so developmental psychology, it's the study of how people change over time due to biological and environmental influences. Now, that's the nature-nurture debate. Biological is nature, how you're born. Environmental is nurture, that's how you're raised. Now, your book talks about the nature-nurture debate, twin studies, all that other stuff. I'm going to let you, the book, take care of that. I don't want to take time for this because we really need to get rolling. So, let's take a look at how we can look at how people develop over time. So the continuity view, you see it on the screen. That just basically says we go up a little bit all the time. Every day and in every way, I'm getting better and better, right? But that's really not how we develop. Sometimes sort of, but it's kind of sometimes it's one step forward, two steps back. Sometimes we really plateau. If you've ever been trying to learn something and you feel like you're not getting any better, you're at this flat stage. So really what we're talking about in this unit is we're really looking at the discontinuity view. We're not looking at continuity and just getting a little better every day. We're looking at this. And what you'll notice is we have stages right here. So right here, a person is developing over time. They are getting older, but their performance is staying the same. And then at some point, they kind of just take this leap and they move to a different stage. And we can call each one of these a stage. So we're going to talk about, I think, at least 4 different types of stages that we can go through, Kohlberg, so on and so forth, and we'll get to that. So I just want to go back and say, this is not really the stage view. The discontinuity view is much more the stage view. Okay, and that's what we're talking about. Developmental stages are those periods of life that you transition between one and the other. We're going to talk about physical changes. We are also going to talk about psychological changes. So first, let's talk about what it's like when you are in the womb, when you are a fetus. One of the things that can happen as far as nurture is a fetus can be exposed to bad things in the environment. They call them teratogens, and they're basically poisons. And they can very much harm a developing infant. I have nicotine up there. Nicotine is not the worst, but it can lead to low birth weight and some other problems. Pollution, just environmental pollution, they're finding more and more, just even air pollution has some pretty negative effects on the fetus. And alcohol can cause fetal alcohol syndrome. If you've ever been around a kid with fetal alcohol syndrome, you can see it physically. There are facial changes that they will have. Also, there are some severe cognitive and emotional deficits. Now, one little sip of alcohol is not going to cause that. Usually that is caused by a mother who uses a lot of alcohol during the pregnancy. But that is a teratogen. It can harm the fetus. That is nurture, not nature, but it is nurture that can very much harm the baby. Because, as you can see here, the brain develops up to 100 billion neurons. That's a lot. And at some point when the brain's really cooking, when you're developing, you can get 250,000 per minute. Now imagine if while your neurons are developing, you have some teratogen, some poison going through your blood. It can really, really harm a baby. So prenatal development is super important throughout your life after you are born. Okay, so let's look at infancy. And in infancy, what we find is that you really have the most supple brain you will ever have when you're born. Your brain is ready to go. It's ready to learn anything. As you learn, they call it synaptic pruning. If you ever think about pruning a tree, that's what's happening to your neurons. And what that means is neurons that aren't used, they just say, well, let's not waste any more energy on that. Excuse me, back up. Not neurons, synapses that aren't used. It's not that the neurons are dying. A synapse is when those neurons connect. And if those neurons are connected by a synapse and they're not really doing anything together and it's not really important, they'll just say, forget it. We're not going to waste any more time with that. In fact, the value of that is that it says we're going to save the energy for the ones that are being used. So instead of having this brain that can do anything, you're getting this brain that is really kind of supercharged to learn the thing that it's learning and not stay ready for the things that it's not learning. So It's a good thing. It makes it sound like it's bad, but it's just saying we're not going to waste energy on synapses that aren't being used. We are going to prune those, and those are going to go away. And notice this happens early. You are developing so much at that time. It's crazy. Um, at about that time too, right after the end of that, we get what's called the naming explosion. And if you've ever been around a kid at that age, they are just naming everything. And what their favorite thing to ask is, what's that? What's that? What's that? And they're learning all of these things. Um, and if you look at that, they say that kids can learn on average about 45 words a day at this point. And you think, oh, 45, that's not bad. Well, imagine if your Spanish teacher said, you have to learn 45 words a day, every day, including Saturdays and Sundays, this whole semester. So that by the end of the semester, you're going to have 45. You'll probably have 4,500 words that you're going to be tested on. You'd say, what? That's going to be super hard, right? But that's what babies do. That's what toddlers do. The brain is ready. The brain is this critical period, they call it. The brain is ready to learn. So cognitive development at about 18 months just explodes. And they call it the naming explosion. This is the last thing we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to let Mr. Davis pick up when he talks about Piaget, which is one of the more fascinating ideas, so he's a lucky ducker. We're going to talk about schemas. And I know my kids, when they were going to elementary school, their teachers talked to them about schemas, and I hope yours did too, and if they don't, that's fine. But they would say schemas. We need to build schemas. What does that even mean? When I think of schemas, here's what I think about. I think there are two metaphors that work for schemas, and this is a good time for you to write down the one that works best for you. When you build a schema, you're building a bookshelf. You're saying, where am I going to put stuff that I learn? You're not learning stuff. You're building a place to put stuff. Those are schemas, right? So the other metaphor that I like is a file cabinet. So when you build a schema, you create a new file folder with a name on it and you put it in the file. So when you learn something new, you have a place to put it. So think about the most organized library in the world. Think about how much information is there and how quickly you can access it. Think about the most organized file cabinet in the world and you can find everything right away. It's alphabetized and all that stuff. You have built good schemas. Now imagine if you get something new and you don't have a bookshelf. You don't have a file cabinet. You have nowhere to put it. So the stuff that you learn just gets kind of randomly put somewhere in your brain. And what happens is when you go to try to get it back, it either didn't get put away and it got tossed, or you can't find it. So building good schemas is really important for learning. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And there's going to be a practice coming up that we can talk about that too. So there are two things that go on with schemas. The first is assimilation. And the mnemonic that I have here is there are two S's here, and the S's stand for the same schema. All you're doing when you assimilate new information is you are taking the new information and you're putting it in an existing file folder or on an existing shelf in the bookshelf. So let's say you watch a new movie and the new Marvel movie comes out. And you say, well, I have a shelf built for Marvel movies, right? So it goes there. My daughter said, my youngest, Clay, said, my child said, I said I kind of wanted to watch WandaVision. And they said, have you watched any other Marvel movies? I said, no. And they said, well, you might not understand that. I wouldn't have any place to put this stuff because I haven't watched these Marvel movies. I don't have a schema for Marvel movies. They do. So Clay would have a much easier time assimilating information than I would. So I don't have the shelf built. Clay has the shelf built. Now, what might happen though is let's say I say, well, you know what, Clay? I want to watch WandaVision. And I want to start figuring this stuff out. So I'm going to start watching all these Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and I build a new shelf. Now, when you're old like me, you don't build new shelves very often, right? When you're young like you're always in all these new classes, 6 periods a day. You're learning new stuff and you're building new shelves, creating new file folders. That's called accommodation because you're saying, I don't have any place to put this. I need to build somewhere to put this. So assimilation is you say, I already got a spot for it. I know where it goes. Accommodation is, I don't have a spot for this. I got to build a new one. And that's what a kid is doing a lot. That's what you're doing a lot. And that's what I'm doing much less. So this is the hard part. And think about this, the more shelves you build, the more file cabinets you have, the more file folders you have. the easier you're just going to get new information. You're like, I know where that goes. I know where that goes. So you are going to learn so much better when you have good schemas. Good schemas are built by accommodation, and assimilation puts things into those file folders. You might even want to rewind what I just said there, because I said it pretty well, and that's really the basis of what we're talking about. Now in class, we're going to go over assimilation or accommodation. We're not going to go over it now. Take it away, Mr. Davis.